Church Hurdles. Episode 2. Does God exist? Discovering the origins of humanity. Last time on Church Hurdles, we introduced you to our hurdlers? Runners? What are we supposed to be called? I don't know. We didn't light bulb. Our helpful hurdle hosts. Unfortunately, the following week, our helpful hurdle hosts found themselves stricken with the common plagues of man. This week, we find ourselves on Facebook and YouTube again to discuss the ever-present obstacles we have while seeking a higher power. Thank you for joining us, and now, without further ado, your helpful hurdle host, who had no idea that this intro was even going to happen, Matt and Susie.
Whoa!
That was awesome. I mean, and I think right now this would have been we need to do that also if we ever talk about the book of Luke, so we can get Vader. I love it. Very good. Thank you, Craig, our producer. Very awesome. Thank you.
With an intro like that, who can help coming on the show with a smile? That is awesome.
I loved it. And I like being a hurdler host or turtle hurdler or whatever I was. I'm not quite sure, but I loved it.
All right. Well, Craig also has some slides to share with us. And so I'm just going to get right into it. Last time we talked about just some of the challenges. If you're out there and you're like, well, yeah, I'm not sure God exists. I'm curious. I want to know. Seems like maybe the people at church have an answer, and then you go and you kind of get the cold shoulder. Hopefully this show designed for you will give you some answers. And we've got really Susie is our in-house hurdler. And this is her brainchild. And so I'm privileged to be along for the ride. I want to start off talking a little bit about faith and reason. Like, are science and faith just automatically opposed to each other? Are they antonyms, right? I was talking to a guy and he said, I'm proud to tell you that I'm steering away from science and I'm believing more in the God of the Bible. And I had to correct him. That's not at all what I want people to do.
All right.
I want people to get into the evidence as much as you can. Get into what evolution teaches, what the Bible actually teaches. And so on this first slide, Mr. Producer, we have Faith and Reason. This is a book. It's an ebook. You can find it on apologeticspress.org. I found it personally very helpful. May or may not be your style, but in this book, Dick Steinyo, not sure exactly, Mr. Dick, I'm sorry about your last name there, but Faith and Reason, and it's a free download. You can look it up on apologeticspress.org as you see here. And I'm just going to look at a couple of drawings and ideas from that book. On our next slide, we have the as-if hypothesis. So a lot of people will say, well, I want to live my life. I want to act as if I knew heaven and hell were real. And then if it turns out to be so, I'm safe. And if not, I didn't lose anything.
Like insurance.
Yeah, right. And that's fine. If that's kind of where you're at, that's fine. But if you'll notice, there's a question mark over this guy's head. And he's really in a position where he doesn't know. He or she doesn't know. The brick wall here is showing that they really don't have a reason to have faith. The reason stops right there at the wall. You can't get through the lack of evidence. And that really is on par. I remember, sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking, Susie. I'll take a breath eventually.
You don't worry about it. Once I started, I don't stop. So,
well, that's two of us. So I was in a seminar, and these people were the seminar leaders, the teachers were saying, the lecturers were putting the idea forth, What we've got here is a situation where we can never really know whether God exists or not. There's no proof. There's no evidence. Can't put God in the test tube. And so therefore, we can't, hear, see, touch, taste, feel him. There's no way we can really know if God exists or not. Well,
Right.
my whole point during this section of the show is going to be that there are other ways to prove God's existence than put him in a test tube. But right here, maybe that mentality, the idea that we can't put God in a test tube, that's that brick wall. And so the idea is, well, I'm going to have faith even though I don't know for sure. The problem is you really don't believe it. You're acting on something you actually don't believe. So that's really a problem. The whole idea of the Greek word faith, if I can just go all preacher on you here for a minute.
Whoa. I promised. Hi, Bailey. She just told me she's watching. I promised her it wouldn't get preachy, so you got to keep it easy.
Okay. Well, let's just look at the idea of the word faith and not preach about it.
That's so. Right.
The idea is that someone is strongly convinced about something.
Right.
So if you tell me, Matt, there's a brand new Lamborghini down at the dealership, not the leadership,
no,
the dealership. If I have faith in what you say, I'm going to be at the dealership ASAP. As soon as I can get my car and speed down there, I'm going to pick up
your
my
car
new
that
Lamborghini.
Is definitely not a Lamborghini. Just to be clear, your Pinto or something, right? That would be me.
Hey, how'd you know my finances? That's why I need a free one.
Right, free Lamborghinis. I didn't know that they were giving those away. I wouldn't have a lot of faith in that. But
if somebody told me that and I believed it had actual faith, I would be there immediately. Even if I don't like Lamborghinis, I'll resell it. Hey. That's the idea of faith, is being strongly convinced. If I just have like a mediocre belief and I think, well, that could be true, not worth risking my job over, I'll check it out when I get off work.
Yeah.
That's not really faith. That's a level of belief, but it's not faith, right? So if I am saying, well, just in case it's true, I'll live my life as if it were true. That's not real faith. It's just you're not very strongly convinced. The evidence on the bottom is in the picture because there is evidence, but it's not something that the person is convinced of. It's not convincing them. They're not considering it at a level where they're convinced.
So my experience has always been, I understand exactly what you're saying, and you're correct, because if you were wrong, I would tell you so. And but I think too,
I have faith that you would.
Exactly. And I was going to say that my children have faith that if they do something I don't like, I will let them know about it. For sure.
Yeah.
And so, but there are some, but those are all tangible things, right? Those are things like they can see the look on mom's face. They can hear the tone in her voice. So they can see the Xbox being smashed with a baseball bat. You know what I'm saying? These are things that they can relate to. And I think the thing that is hard is, and we talked about this a little the last time, just because for people, especially people that grew up in church or it was just part of their life, to go from just, I wake up every day. I have faith that there are going to be trees outside. I've got faith that there will be some kind of climate, whether it's raining or snowing, or it's Missouri. It could be doing all four at the same time, but it's great. And that I have faith, believe it or not, the McDonald's will be open when I go there at 9:00 at night. And those are things, right? But again, those are all tangible things. So so it's really hard for a person to be told, just have faith.
Right.
Okay. Well, to me, having faith means it's something that my senses can verify for me. Right. And when you look at your picture here with your dude, what's the wall to me is just, it's a hurdle. And the first hurdle is, does God exist? That's the first hurdle. If you don't,
and where's the evidence?
Yeah. And, and I think some of that comes from, there's so many ways to look at it. I think there are folks that would say, oh, I definitely believe there's something, I just don't know what it is. And that's more of an agnostic approach, totally acceptable. And, you know, and again, our disclaimer, just for everyone, for the probably 2 people that are watching, we love both of you. And, but the thing that I want to reiterate is this is not for proselytizing. This is not for converting. This is literally information and discussion, because I know I'm not the only one out there that thinks like this. And I know for a fact that I'm not. And I think it's great that people could, and we'd love to hear your comments, you know, as this goes along. We appreciate them if they're kind. You know, those are always preferable. Might even get you on the screen. You never know. But I think that one of the things that people struggle with is that how do you just know, right? How do you, just like my kids know, or when it's something that you can't, you think, oh, I can't see that, or I can't feel it, I can't hear it. But in a way, it just depends. And of course, again, this is a hurdle. And I want to, you know, we'll go ahead and plug Lee. So Lee's book, this book that I read, I don't know, 15 years ago, was how I got over the first hurdle. Now, reading this book, I was like, oh, that's no, but it planted enough of reason in my mind, which this is like what your slide shows. I had enough reason to start thinking about it differently. And for people that are not familiar with Lee Strobel, his wife decided that she was going to follow Jesus, and he was not a happy camper. So his whole goal in life was to basically tell her, you know, that she was a ding dong. Now, he didn't say those words exactly, but I'm pretty sure, like in private conversations, that probably happened. So,
and he set out to prove that God does not exist.
And so I think one of the things, the more I read about just little things, it's nothing, you know, there's nothing like, whoa, but I do know that the section about DNA was really impressive to me, because he's not writing it from a biblical perspective, really. He's not writing it from you just got to have faith type of perspective. What he did was he explained, you know, because, you know, like, I don't think that evolution and Jesus are exclusive of each other. Something started something somewhere. Some people think that it was, you know, I don't know, some pond scum or whatever. I don't even remember what the theory started with. But, you know, the idea is that you started with something and it evolved into other things. That's always been hard for me to grasp, even before that, because if I have something, whatever it makes is just going to continue to make the same thing. I have a hard time to believe if I made, you know, if I planted tomatoes and I would expect for it to produce more tomatoes, right? If it started producing, I don't know, crappie and kangaroos, I would be like, that is very interesting. Definitely would prove some stuff. But that's never happened to me, just for whatever it's worth. I have never grown kangaroos. Well, really, I've never grown tomatoes. So maybe that's just honesty. But I think the thing, what I'm trying to say is people do not just, they need something to wrap their minds around, to think about, to find that conclusion on their own. You're never going to tell somebody, well, I mean, look at the trees, look at the sun, look at the clouds, look at this, look at babies. You know, I mean, and some babies I don't want to look at, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to look at your baby. Your baby looks like a potato. That happens sometimes, but people are, that's the strategy that they use. But I think a better strategy is to literally utilize science, right? There's a lot of wonderful things in science. Even if you're a 100% devout Christian, or you are 100% not into it at all, you can at least appreciate that science is showing you, right, that that there's some things that are really, really amazing. I mean, I'll use an example, and a simple one is just all the factors that have to be just perfect for anything to reproduce, right? I mean, everything has to be just so. and women that struggle with or couples that struggle with infertility and things like that know far too well that all it takes is one small thing to disrupt that, that event. And I think also, when you look at just little things, I mean, it's like, the moon is where the moon is, and it hopefully doesn't fall on Earth. I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, I haven't checked the news today, but I don't think that's in the headlines. But little things like that, and if you look at the science behind it, not just being like, oh, well, he hung the moon. Oh, well, that sounds great. If you literally look at science behind it, the Earth's rotation, the axis, the way the whole planet is set up, tectonic plates, everything that has to happen. The Earth is being built. The Earth is still building itself. Every time a volcano erupts, every time an earthquake happens, it shifts, it changes the Earth. And those are things that people can look at, and then through that process decide, that yes, indeed, I think that, that I can start to believe something caused all of these things to happen. The worst thing that a person can say to someone who doesn't believe is to say, well, you just have to have faith. And I got to tell you, that was the most frustrating answer I ever got. Or they'd be like, well, if you just read your Bible, Genesis tells you all about it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to say this one more time. I don't believe that book. So stop telling me to read something. That would be like telling me to read Huck Finn for boating lessons. I mean, I don't believe that Huck Finn is a reliable source for how to be a great rafting person, or something like that. I just pulled that out, but I don't. I hope I'm making some sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so on this slide here, what have we got going on here? The leap of faith thing. So it's still got the reason wall,
and that's basically that's what they're asking you to do, right? Just believe.
Just pretend that wall isn't there. Evidence. And that's frustrating. They're like, right. Pretend that the wall, the hurdle, the obstacle, whatever you want to call it, just isn't there. Just go around it. That is, I mean, I don't know. And I think maybe, I don't know if it's the factor of it's hard for folks to understand that person cannot fit. They just can't mentally process it that way. And I think the most beautiful thing would be to understand where that person really is, and to not to make it a goal every day to be like, well, today's going to be the day. I'm going to convince them today. Just let it happen if it's going to happen. And I think that means a lot more. And first of all, if you are a Christian, that would be the most, that would be the strongest case for being a Christian. To see somebody that's like, oh, they're not judging me. They're trying to help me, or they understand that I don't believe, and they're okay with that, and they still want to go have coffee and pie with me, things like that. And it means more than you think, because on the outside, you just assume, okay, Christians hang out with Christians, and the heathens hang out with the heathens, and that's how it always was. I mean, I was very uncomfortable. And to some degrees, I still am around people that really they just ooze it. They're just, everything is like, they're like, well, we would just like to thank the Lord for this straw in our cup. And we would just like to thank the Lord for tea bags at McDonald's and carbonation in our soda. And, it gets kind of weird. And you're like, yeah.
Have you been listening to my kids pray?
No, but do you let them have soda? I don't think that's you. I'm feeling that.
Well, they would thank God if I did.
Oh, yeah, I know, right? They can come to Susie's house. So I think, though, but you know what I'm saying?
It comes off as fake, though, right?
It sure does. And not only that, but it also says to them, if you believe in God and the things that'll follow from that, hurdles that you may have to cross, that you need to be just like this too. And I'll be honest, yeah. I've never thanked God for a straw. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't behind it, but I just doesn't seem like, it seems like you're making it into something of a show. The other thing, of course, is that you want to be able to justify to yourself, right, that there's a reason that you believe what you believe. And I'll be honest with you, A lot of times I would ask people, why do you believe, why do you believe, or what happened, or, whatever the case may be. And a lot of times they just say, well, I just feel God, and I just have faith that he's there, and he answers my prayers. And I mean, that's like, and for a person, from the other side of that, I'm thinking, I mean, what prayer did he answer? Did you ask him to, like, to bring your dog back from the dead and it worked? And they'll say things like, no, but I asked for the light to change green and it did. Yeah. Well, that's also called engineering and timing and traffic lights. But hey, you do you. I don't care. But I think that that's where I want someone to tell me. I want someone to be real with me, and people that. And it's hard for folks that grow up in churches, right? Because it's just that's just part of their day to day from the very beginning. And so I think it's wonderful if somebody can understand that there are a lot of people that it's going to be a process, and it might be a 2-week process, it might be a 2-year process, or in my case it could be 15 years. I'm just stubborn, I guess.
So I know anytime anybody learns anything, we're learning that thing and we're not learning how to teach it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's you're right, there are a lot of folks it's very hard to teach. On this slide we've got that it's very hard for them to do the teaching. So I was trying to say,
yes, I knew what you meant.
Rational faith here is a kind of faith where you make a commitment with your faith because of your strong belief, but it's based on reason because you've seen evidence. By reason, we mean just like putting one thing to another. So that's really like you've been describing, if a Christian doesn't have a rational faith, they may have a very weak faith.
Yeah. I mean,
so just a shout out to Christians. If there are any Christians that ever come across this show, you need to actually investigate this and see, is there a reason to believe? Have I built my beliefs on just what my parents believed or what I grew up believing? Is it really real? Because otherwise, if everybody just believes the same thing they grew up believing, we're all going to get stuck in our ruts and not really know what the truth is.
Well, and I think too, so if we go back and we say, okay, there's a God, and for the folks that are regular church attendees, and there are wonderful, wonderful people out there. I've met all kinds, right? So I've met Christians that their whole goal is to just ignore everything that I have said, or any of, they don't want the, if you've ever worked in sales, you don't want the, yeah, I'm just going to have to ask my husband. You want commitment right away. You want to get the deal signed, and you get some folks that are more of that mindset. And then you get folks that are okay. They probably privately, I'm sure, they're praying and hoping that, from their perspective, I know that my experience anyway has been that the prayers will usually be something like, help me find the right words and help put some, the right things in my path and things of that nature. And then, and let it happen. I think there's a misnomer out there, right? That Christians think that, and I just so everybody's clear here, this isn't like we're not dogging Christians. So, there's Christians here, so don't worry about that. But what I'm saying is that we need to be able to hear someone's points and really hear them, and not just dismiss them with, oh, okay, well, I know you say that there's no proof that God exists, but look all around you. Don't, try to, again, like what you just said, maybe there have been times when you're like, this was something that really helped me know that my faith was legitimate, was validated by something or another. Sometimes people, just, they say the things that they've heard other people say, or they've been taught to say. I have been subjected to many a testimony and and things like that. And I love to I love people who are really joyful and excited to. There's a difference between being excited to show your faith and trying to sell your faith. Those are different things. And sometimes the best thing you can do is really just to be there. And just the fact that you're there and that person knows you're a Christian and they're okay anyway. And they're not trying to sell you anything. They're just trying to um, know who you are as a human and just be a friend to you. I think speaks volumes to people more than they realize. Everybody wants to get out their Bible and show some verses and talk about the Roman road or whatever, and that couldn't be more off-putting because believe me, it's been heard many times, and I think I know you and I have had these discussions for it seems like 100 years, but we know that I'm not that old. And but it's kind of the same thing. I think it's been the same kind of topic. It's like what is it about if you walk into a church, there's either an assumption that you're 100%, you've been sold on salvation or whatever the phrase they're using, or that you have no they don't really take the time to figure out why did you even come to church. If they haven't seen you before, there's a reason that you came. It may just be curiosity, if nothing else.
Yeah. I wanted to make the point that even for Christians on this next slide, God tells us to have a rational faith. Just believe is not what the Bible says. Test all things, hold fast to what is good. Well, that means test all things. That means don't just believe, actually figure out, is this stuff true or not? What's our next slide, Craig? All right.
Oh, there's big words here.
Yeah. Because we like to act like we know what we're talking about and everything.
Right. Sure.
All right. So legitimate proofs, accurate ways to arrive at knowledge. Putting God in a test tube or meeting him and shaking his hand is not the only way to know if somebody exists. So I just want to go through, and I know I'm walking slow. I'm sorry, Susie. You know how detailed I am. Empirical data. This is what science is based on, right? This is seeing it, digging it up, putting it in a test tube, all of that good stuff. And that is a legitimate way to arrive at knowledge. That's important. Christians, that's the word. Christians are not anti-science. The science that...
right.
Yeah, go ahead. The science that has done so many great things in our society today. We recognize that.
Sure. But I think, again, that goes back to... I'll give you an example. And I know all of the things for the most part. I know you and I agree on a lot of these things, so I'm not worried about us not agreeing. But here's the thing: does if anybody remembers, there was a few years ago, well, some years ago now, and there was a church, I think it was out of Kansas, right? And they were very vile, and they're protesting, and they had some very offensive signs, and they were just really, really in people's faces. Well, guess who made the news? Those guys did, right?
Right.
And
right.
The people, like even in the book that Lee has, when he said, he went to, I think it was West Virginia or Virginia, and he was like, wow, I get there, and these people are literally holding these rallies in churches to get rid of all these textbooks that they no longer, this for whatever reason they've decided they don't agree with. And I understand there are definitely some things, in the world that maybe we don't agree with, and that's fine. But of course, they weren't doing it in a what I would consider the way that they are called to do it. If you were wanting to follow that, instead,
Sure.
it was newsworthy, but not for a positive thing. And I think that for folks like myself, right, when you talk about the physically observable things. Unfortunately, be the church that makes the news because you did something amazing, unexpected, not part of the, the we're going to set ourselves apart from the world and all that stuff that comes up so often. Make it something that everybody would want to be a part of. Everybody can agree that being a nice human being and a decent human being is an acceptable thing regardless of your belief system. And we do find a lot of times that and I get it, I understand the media has its thing too, but if you've got, if your church is going to put up signs that, with some really offensive, having your children carry those signs, your children are learning these things, and then you've got the same, some of the stuff that's the stuff that's going to make the news, and unfortunately you're fighting against that, right?
Right.
And so that makes it even harder for churches. And so I think the best, again, like what you've got here, you've got physically observable evidence, right? So remember that you're not just fighting the thoughts in a person's head, but you are dealing with what other churches or other if you would, Christian organizations, or at least calling themselves that, are doing to literally, churches in some cases are their own worst enemy. And they very much turn people off of even considering, even consider even stepping foot in one, or even communicating with somebody that goes there. And I know not all churches are like that, but I'm saying that for people that don't go to church, that's their example.
Right.
And I'm done. So we've got, I'm trying to read your next, credible testimony.
Right. And so in a courtroom, we can understand witnesses that cannot be justifiably doubted, trustworthy witnesses. Obvious truth. Now, that one's not as easy. I want to give an example of that one. With obvious truth, you have the principle in logic of non-contradiction. In other words, a thing cannot both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense. Well, that's just intuitive. We already know that is how it has to be. You could also say contradictory statements cannot both be true. And matter of fact, these principles go beyond our physical world. They are true of the universe, but even of God himself. In other words, I can know with certainty that God cannot both exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense. So that's obvious truth, foundational truth, cannot be otherwise. Deduction, with correctly reached conclusions based on evidence. I don't know how many of us have read Robinson Crusoe, but there was a certain point in the story at which he was walking the shoreline, and he saw a human footprint. And of course, he's there on an abandoned, not abandoned island. How do you say that? A desert island. Nobody else is on there.
Yeah, right.
That's it. And yet he sees this human footprint. So he can justifiably conclude some stuff. One, there's another human being on the island now. And there's another being on the island. That's what I was supposed to say. And two, that the other being is human.
Okay.
So even if he never saw this guy that he names Friday, he still would know beyond a shadow of a doubt. There's definitely someone else on the island. Why? He didn't see him, hear him, smell him, touch him, taste him. But he can know from deduction, definitely somebody else on the island.
Sure. He can also know, right, that person got on the island somehow.
That's right. Maybe there's hope for him to get off.
Exactly. Yeah. So, one of the things I was going to say is like where you were mentioning obvious truth. One can't be, you can't have both. And so for folks that don't believe, it's just the same, right? In their mind, God can't exist and not exist because if that is their belief, right? So I think again, it's a thing that has to happen for me anyway, I believe that for folks that don't, that's their hurdle, it is really a matter of looking at science behind the things that we love. I mean, I you know what I love? I love true crime. There is nothing better than a good murder story. Okay. So what do forensics, matching stuff up, all of that stuff, it's fascinating to me. I always studied on that, and I always thought that was really cool. And I think those are the kinds of things where you read stuff and you're like, wow, that's kind of, wow, that's really cool. I didn't know they could do that, or I didn't. And and of course science just continues, right? Continues to find things that that are amazing. Especially nowadays, it just seems like it happens almost every day. It had to been very amazing the first time somebody ever found a dinosaur bone or something like that. They're like, whoa, this is, like you said, I got some proof here. I didn't see the dinosaur. I didn't ride the dinosaur. I'm not Fred Flintstone, but I'm pretty sure that obviously something existed. And it's the same thing. I think we all do that, right? We do that every day. We see something that's like, okay, I know, for example, if you know that you locked your house when you left and you come home and the doorknob's broken off, good chance that maybe you'll be in one of those true crime shows, So, but those are, it's just as much for a person who doesn't believe that as it is for a person that does. So just like people are like, oh, my faith is really strong, their faith is really strong too. And so you're not going to argue your way through that. You're not going to convince them that they're just wrong. You need to, I think, being able to share some ideas of, well, because here's the thing. If the conversation is that they want to believe, or they wish they could believe, but they just can't find the evidence, right? That's a great example of a person who's at least curious. I'm not saying like, and then you have to remember, they're just curious about this one thing now. You can't go 5 hurdles over and be like, well, come to church Sunday and we'll get you baptized or something. You're going to have to understand that these are all different hurdles, and they're all I don't know what the word would be. I don't really want to say jumped over, because I don't think that that's really the case. Because in your first slide there, you got a guy just jumping over the wall and ignoring what his real feelings and attitude were about things. But I would implore anybody I would love it if we have anybody that's a Christian that's watching. If you've had an experience like this where you've had someone who you were trying to help them understand or find something that helped them to believe and it worked, or it was or maybe just an experience that you had that you learned from, we would love to hear your comments. If you want to send some messages or post anything. The other thing too is it's the same thing for folks that are struggling or this is a hurdle and they're a little curious, but they don't, just like myself, that was not a slow that wasn't a fast process. That was something I had to really, really, and then of course I would read this stuff and then of course I go find something else to read about that. It's almost like eventually you're like, well, I'm going to eventually find something that tells me that I was right all along and it's not real and it doesn't exist. And I think in doing so, for me anyway, it was, it just helped me be able to reason through it. I'm not a person that you can just tell me to believe something. It's just never going to happen, as you well know.
Well, I've never tried it, so
I know
it doesn't seem to have worked though.
But the beautiful thing is how many years that's been, right? And you were somebody I could always talk to, and I think that's, if nothing else, everything happens in its own time, and things just happen when they happen, and it's not up to that individual that's trying. I understand that some people take that they're very zealous about their faith. Totally understand that, but at the same time, it's also something that's very off-putting for someone who is curious or is seeking, but they're 5 hurdles away, and you're trying to drag them, knock all the hurdles over. It just doesn't work.
You can't force it because it's got to be their journey. It just has to be.
Yeah, and
we talked about Lee Strobel.
Yeah,
go ahead. Well, we talked about Lee Strobel earlier.
Yep. Just keep going, Matt.
I think we have
We
a
did.
lag in our conversation
I'm
between
sure
each
it's on
other.
your end. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we talked
probably.
about Lee Strobel.
Sure. Okay. And he talks about the icons of evolution, the pictures of evolution.
Yes.
And we've got another slide on the Stanley Miller experiment there. So, right, the idea here is you put some basic, let's see, I want to make sure I get this right
Material.
here. Material, right? And
Can we just talk about his hair for a minute?
he's an Einstein lookalike. He's
I know, a
brilliant.
little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't.
So it says by reproducing the atmosphere of primitive Earth and then shooting electric sparks through it to stimulate or simulate lightning, Miller managed to produce a red goo containing amino acids. Now, at first blush, this is super exciting because amino acids are the basic building blocks of the simple cell. This is life. This is real living stuff, or at least the building blocks of it. So theoretically, if we can get the building blocks, then maybe they can assemble themselves into a living cell at some point. So I think, let me just read this. The moment, Lee says, the moment I first learned of Miller's success, my mind flashed to the logical implication. If the origin of life can be explained solely through natural processes, then God was out of a job.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, that is the appeal. That is the promise of evolution. And it's what it kind of really represents as a whole. God's out of a job if life can come about, or this earth can come about through solely naturalistic processes. And what that means is that there is nothing outside that created the universe or that caused it to exist. In other words, the physical is all there is. That's the presupposition to Darwinism. Did you have a comment on that?
I did. I always have a comment. You know that. So, yes. So here's the thing. First of all, let's step back. And this is me. I'm doing this off the cuff, not through the thing in the book. But one of the things that I would say is, okay, however, and we also know that most scientists don't agree on his version of what the primitive Earth atmosphere was. But one of the things that I find fascinating is like, well, let's just say that he was right. Okay. Even though he does look like Scrooge McDuck. I want to thank Craig for that insight, because he does look like Scrooge McDuck. But the thing that you want to remember here, right, is that those things are still all perfect. They would have all of those things had to be just so. This guy had to put them in glass bowls and all this other stuff and shoot some electricity through it to do what he did. And all he got, and he still just got some red goo. I'm certain that he left. I don't know. He looks 10 or 15,000 years old, but probably isn't. But I bet the red goo just stayed red goo. I mean, it's not any different than in, like, I think during like the early, when the first person, if you can imagine, that saw a fly, and the next day, they covered a dish or something, and the next day there was disgusting things in it, maggots or something, and it's like, and they were like, whoa, that's so cool. And, because why? They didn't see the process that happened, right? But if you think about all of the things that are around us, all of the different insects, and I'm just going to say, if God is real and I get a chance to talk to that guy, I want to talk to him about wasps. I don't understand why they exist. That just seems silly. So it seems like if you're going to have an evolutionary thing, right, that the evolution of things would make sense. I understand, but I'm sure there's some people out there. If anybody knows why wasps exist, if you could just tell us, I would like that, because that is something I'm really, that's a hurdle for me. So
we do live in a fallen world according to the Bible, right? And that's part of the bad stuff. So
okay.
There is some supposition that, like, mosquitoes, not your question. You ask about wasps, I know, but there is some question or theory that mosquitoes would have originally gotten their Albumin, what is it they're looking for in our blood? From a plant source.
Oh,
So
okay.
originally they wouldn't have sucked humans' blood. Probably the wasp wouldn't have stung humans either originally.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I don't think they were. Yeah, I'm going to write that down as no. But I think too, right? So, but what is on this one, on this particular experiment? Still, everything had to be just so in order for it to happen.
Right.
So for
highly
me, that
controlled
was
environment.
a highly controlled environment. And let's just step out of that for a second. If you want to get real, there was a scientist behind it.
Mm-hmm. A designer, you mean?
Maybe.
Ouch.
I didn't say that. Yeah, I did say that. But yeah, it's the same concept, right? Someone had to put all of these things in motion, right?
And where did you get the electricity? I mean, if this originally happened, where was the electricity?
Well, of course they're assuming lightning, right? But again,
I guess they're assuming in the Earth's atmosphere, right? So, but then where would the Earth have come from? Well, it came from the Big Bang. Okay, well, the very condensed matter, where did that come from? The vacuum that it expanded into. Where did the vacuum come from?
Well, where was
where was
the trigger for the Big Bang? There's just it just kind of. You can follow that back to infinity. Can you follow it back to infinity? Is that I don't know.
Well, that's the problem. You can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I know that this guy's experiment, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, most scientists do disagree with his idea that the original atmosphere was full of ammonia and other things that are really not conducive to life. Yeah, well, I have no comment on that, because because that is my environment. Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So yeah, but I just maybe I should be a scientist, but I think that but the red goo, even if it made something, right, it would only replicate, and then that thing is made once, and you need more than one, and I think of things like insects that perfectly match tree bark and things like that. I mean, that's like your computer becoming self-aware, right? It's like, hey, you know what, you guys, what did you notice that this tree looks like? We should do the next time we evolve. We should work on making ourselves look like that bark. I don't think that animals or insects willed themselves into looking like tree bark. I don't think they know what tree bark is. So some of that stuff was some of the things that were in the book, and also some things that have since been, just thoughts in my head.
They talk here about this experiment, and they, the next question is, okay, well, what's the new theory? What's our most current understanding of what that original atmosphere might have been like? If you replay the experiment, what do you get? And the answer from the top scientist here is you don't get amino acids. Right. At all. You get maybe some fudge, some goo, but it's not amino acids. It's not even the building blocks for life. And then, of course, we have to animate those building blocks. They have to assemble themselves. They have to begin replicating themselves. And all of that is just a non-starter, because the simple cell is irreducibly complex. If you take out the replication process, it's not going to work. If you take out the little machine that takes apart the DNA, it's not going to work. If you take out the machine that copies the DNA into the RNA, it's not going to work. If you take out, if something's broken, it's not going to work. And so it has to, boom, all assemble and appear exactly at the same time. And I wish, if it were true, I wish it would happen with my son's bicycle, because that boy can break bicycles like nothing else, and they never fix themselves.
Well, that's obviously an evolutionary flaw. So
I'll say.
I mean, talk about the weakest link. Have you checked the chain? Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I think so. Just as a summary on all of this. And did you have another slide?
Man, I've got tons of slides. We've got these 4. Yeah. It's like 10 minutes till it have been an hour. No, but we have Darwin's Tree of Life. We have
I like the
Ern,
embryo one. The embryo one, if you had that one, I don't know if you have it.
that's 2 slides ahead, Craig. So if we can get that embryo. Oh, yep, boom.
There we go. And it's like, look, obviously we all have a common ancestor because
So what this is,
everybody
it's
starts
supposed to
with the
be
same.
8 different species, right? And you can see them labeled. I don't know if you get your magnifying glass, you can see the first one's a fish, next one's a salamander. I don't know what is in the world does that say. It's probably German, so I think that's the turtle, obviously from the bottom drawing. Chicken, and of course the last one, pig. Last one is a human, and so Ernst's idea was, well, really, in the development of a human embryo, it copies all of its evolutionary ancestors, and it goes through all these stages and looks like its evolutionary ancestors. What's your next slide, Craig? Oh, yes. So this is what not drawings, but the actual embryos look like underneath the drawings. So you can see that really the drawings are not accurate. They're just not.
Yeah. Well, I think look, so let's just let him have that. Let's let him have that.
Sure,
Okay, we're
for
gonna let him
argument's
have
sake.
that.
Okay.
Right. So here's the deal. Again, and I think this is in the book as well, if I remember right, because it's been a while since I've read it fully. But he mentions, if you've got something that works, right, then you would continue to utilize something that works. So cars have 4 wheels and brakes and steering wheels, and they all have that. And then the variations are the color and how many doors they have, and maybe the body style and things like that. But the manufacturers figured out early on that 4 wheels, 1 steering wheel with the rack and pinion or whatever the system that it used was really the best way to build a car. And that's how cars are still built. And so if you are able to accept the fact that there might be a creator, then, and or if it's something that is curious for you, then this book, the one thing I loved about it was this was where kind of for me it was like, oh, because if that made sense to me, because I like to build things. I like to build them not near as well as you would, but I do build them sometimes. And I remember thinking, well, yeah, I mean, if I'm going to build something, everybody frames a house in a pretty similar fashion, right? We got 16-inch, on center studs. People do drywall the same way every time they do it. You don't have some guy go, I'm going to mix it up today. That's what I do when I cook. I'm like, I know the recipe says to do this, but I'm totally not going to do that. And the next time I won't be able to replicate whatever I did this time. And it just continues. So my cooking is a classics in evolution.
But I want to stop you there. You don't decide, I believe I'll use dirt instead of flour this time. That's going to be okay.
I have not done that.
It's an idea for you. Shampoo
I'm
instead of oil. They're both kind of oily. Okay.
They are a little bit, yeah.
Right.
But yeah, it's the kind of the same thing. Like, so once you know that something works, you continue to utilize it that way. Like anybody that does, I mean, anything that obviously we know, like math, although I can't stand math, we know that, 2 + 2 usually will give you 4, except for very high values of 2, then you might get 5. But I think that that's a Roger joke. But the thing is that if it once a system has worked, it stays that way. It seems, as far as back as we can tell. And then it, like you said, in these pictures, it was very clear. I understood what the guy was trying to say. He was trying to say, well, but the argument can be made both ways, right? Yeah, there's a common denominator there. Sure, okay, well, you have that, but even so, that doesn't really speak to anything. Doesn't necessarily argue. You can argue it for either side, I think, because you can have the differences, just like I talked about with the cars. But all cars are going to have to start out with four wheels.
Yeah, I think one thing about this drawing is when you just see Hankel's drawing, it's which I think is the way you say it. It's very convincing. If this is in fact how embryos look, and the human embryo, in fact, looks a lot like its early ancestors through different stages of development, how would you account for that? I mean, is that the way God made it? That just doesn't make sense. It makes sense. Well, it must be. Wow, there's it's going through those evolutionary stages embryonically. But when you find out, well, that's actually not an accurate representation of the data.
Right.
And why do we still have something from the 1800s in our textbooks as fact?
Right.
Then it's
so
got to change
expensive
our
to
outlook.
Well, and even so, I think the other, again, I'm gonna say this. If you look at that top row, we got fish, salamander, turtle, chicken. So at the end is human, right? So then that means evolutionarily, is that a word? I just made it up.
Yeah.
You would always just get humans.
Mm.
Because if that's where, because his argument, right, is going to be, well, here's fish, here's salamanders. You can't, if that's the evolution of it, then why would it continue to differentiate into the separate species over and over again? And of course, the argument would be, well, because the first fish that evolved, you got to get a second fish somehow. So how did the first fish get the second fish? How did it begat? Begat. That's my favorite thing too. Everybody, I think that's something we can all get behind. How the Bible just begats everybody. Well, so much begatting. So,
all right. So there's the last slide in this series, and what is that slide, Craig? All right,
dirt.
The Areopteryx. And so
wrong.
there's the actual one of the actual, fossils that we have of that.
Thank you.
And so you can see the wings. You can actually see the imprint of the feathers there. It's got this really kind of funny looking tail, but the classical feather design, at least, where the feathers go out from the spine and out from the tail part of the spine sticking out down there. The head's at this backwards funny angle. I'm going to say not an old age death right there. Something traumatic happened there.
Probably ran right into a window.
Got hit by a car?
You're right.
No, maybe not.
So
this was claimed. This was one of the great intermediary species between reptiles and birds.
Yeah.
And so the claim was, that this guy has some reptile features, especially in his. What was it, Susie? Was it in the tail, or the tail and the?
I thought it,
like the back of it was more of a reptile.
Yeah, I thought the back of it or something to that effect. Something about I don't remember if it was the feet, legs,
but it had wings.
Yeah, but it had wings.
Yeah. Well, we've discovered more of these species, and that's kind of how a fossil discovery goes. You have some, and then you find more and more of them because it's a real species. And
right,
what we find, is, look at how thin these hand bones, if you will, are in the wings. Look at those tiny bones. And of course, it had the wings of a bird. Okay, well, let's move down. Those ribs, I mean, they're just tiny lines. You can barely see the outline of the ribs in the rock. And then you move down. Does that look like a solid, heavy duty bone for bearing a lot of weight, crawling around on the earth? I am no archaeologist. I am, I'm not a scientist that studies this, but I know that's a tiny bone. It almost goes away to nothing there below what I'd call the kneecap.
Craig, do you have an option to zoom in on that? I don't know if he does, but come in again. Just so, if you can't, that's fine. I was just wondering because I'm not a person, I'm not an archaeologist or anything, but although, I realize I probably come across as one. I'm kidding.
You missed your calling.
Right? But I think though, first of all, there's so many types. Oh, there you go. That's good. Yeah, there we go. There's so many types of fossils and so many types of things that are found. And, this idea that there's going to be one, if there was, if you would, for lack of a better way to say it, if there's the missing link, right? I would expect that there's going to be a few of those, right? We would find several. So wherever this one was found, you would think you would find more, or in other areas. But I don't really know that. I mean, if it's funny if you think about somebody, finds fossils from our day and age right now for breeds of dogs that never, I mean, people are constantly doing the designer breeds and stuff like that. I mean, they would be like,
Right.
whoa, check it out. Here's the missing link between, ponies and, because I mean, you've got, I mean, have you seen some of the dogs nowadays? They are gigantic, not just my dog. I mean, other dogs. So I think I think it's interesting.
And you wouldn't have one intermediary species. The difference between land animals and whales, for example, is so vast. You would need many intermediary species taking these small steps from one to the other. We don't find any of them.
Yeah, I think, and you've got the Cambrian period. There's a lot of people talk about that.
Cambrian
And
explosion.
the explosion, and again, we don't know the answers to a lot of these things. We make a lot of, we're having to do the best we can with the information that we have, or that we have access to. But I do think that, again, everybody has, whether they believe that God exists or not. I think for the folks that do, keep in mind that if somebody tells you that they don't, I think a lot of people are personally offended when they hear that. Like if somebody said, "Yo, mama's so fat," that kind of thing, and they're just like, "Whoa," they're going to fight you or something. And I think that we need to remember that just because that somebody says that, it does not mean that they're telling you that you're an idiot. In fact, sometimes they're telling you that because what's happening is they're looking for you to explain, why do you believe what you believe. And it's really, it can be an opportunity. A lot of it is in how you respond to it. But we could go on that topic. However, I know that we are over an hour, and people are probably tired of listening to us yap. So
Inconceivable.
For those of you that aren't hip, that is a reference to The Princess Bride. But Matt and I are super hip, so it's cool. I think too, again, I want to remind people, churches and people that run into others, to really hear what they're saying. Like we talked about last time, I have asked and approached many churches, many Christians, to try to get some insight in how they believe, what they believe, and how did they get there. And for me, I have found that a lot of folks grow up in church, so it's just kind of a default setting for them. And for those that don't, they usually can tell you a story or their history of, what, this is what was going on with me, this is what happened, and it doesn't, and we're not talking about, they're like, oh, I was walking one day and God just jumped out of the clouds and talked to me. It wasn't, I've never had that story told to me. But they may say something a little bit like this, where somebody mentioned something to me and I got to reading about it, and then a person that's curious will continue to find things. Just like, I mean, if you want to believe that the person that you're about to marry is a really, really good person, you will sure overlook a lot of stuff, right, in order to be able to justify marrying that person. I mean, you can overlook like banjo playing, for example.
Is there a chance Roger's going to watch this video?
Probably, but that's fine. I love him. He knows it. But I think that those are the things, we obviously we want to believe something, or we want to be asking the questions. But when your response is, well, I can't, why don't you believe in God? It's so obvious. And, that's not the right approach. And you're really doing a disservice in a way to probably learning an awful lot about another human being, and to also be a great source of, support, if you will, for lack of a better way to say it. And it doesn't happen always overnight. You just never know. But and you make great friends along the way.
That's right. Listening is hard. You have to ask questions. Well, really, tell me more about that. Why don't you believe? And actually want to know. And then when you know why they don't want to believe, maybe you can say, okay, well, let me do some research and get back with you. Who knows? They might be
Yeah,
interested in having a continuing discussion.
they might, and they may not. But at the same time, you know, when my experience was, well, here's 15 Bible verses that tell you all the reasons that God exists, and it's like, yeah, you totally weren't listening, were you? And so you really need to hear them. And I think that that'll go a long, long ways for them, because for people that didn't grow up in the church, if you can find somebody that will hear you and accept you as crazy as you are and as weird as you are, I'm not speaking from my own personal experience, then that goes a long ways. It really does.
Cool. Very good. All right. Well, some of the evidence we looked at tonight shows really a lot of the flaws of evolution. And every one of them points to how intelligent design is a better explanation. We touched on something earlier, and we talked about how, this is a little bit different than just this playing a wild card. We're not just saying, oh, well, God did it. We can't explain it physically, therefore God did it. What we're really saying is there has to be something outside the natural world to create the natural world, because it cannot create itself. We talked about the bicycle evolving. We could talk about taking a watch apart, putting all the pieces in the bag, shaking them up. They're never going to come back together in a working watch. And so that's because you have to have design. And I know, Susie, you talked about that a little bit too. And so if we show the shortcomings of evolution, then we're going to show the need for an intelligent designer who is a spirit being outside of the physical world, who then can come in and create it.
Yeah. To that, I would like to add, there's nothing wrong with believing evolution, right? As far as the fact of evolution, as in we're evolving, right? We're evolving. Human beings evolve, animals evolve, things are happening. However, we would, I think, something, it's easier for me, even as much of a skeptic as I always was. I never, my background, I never went to church and never had anything to do with that. I can tell you that it's hard to imagine that for me, let's just say evolution is 100%. Darwin was 100% on the money. I don't think he was necessarily, but let's just say he was. Again, the issue becomes how I have a hard time believing if you had a thing that evolved, that thing evolved into this other. It could only, how did it get another one to continue that particular evolution spree, or whatever you want to call it. And then, but it's just like those images or those drawings at the end, if the evolution ended at human, right, then you would only have the one thing. But again, for anybody that is 100% committed to evolution, Darwin, all that, that's totally fine. What we want you to hopefully get from this is that that just because somebody is Christian, or a believer of in God, maybe they're not a Christian, but that there are a lot of very good examples of intelligent design. Now, it doesn't, when we use that term, we're using it, obviously in a very specific way. But again, those things didn't just, even if the goo came from somewhere, the lightning had to happen, the whatever, all the things had to be just right for it to start, and it would have had to continue to be just perfect for it to continue to happen. So I'm only saying that for anybody that might feel like we're telling them that their belief in evolution is not that they can't believe that, because that's not what we're trying to say.
Well, I don't
mean,
have
they can
anything to
certainly
add,
believe
so yeah.
But I think that this book, for those of you, this book is called Case for a Creator. It's by Lee Strobel. It's a really good read. Lee was an atheist, and literally the whole point of this was due to a job assignment he got. It's a really interesting read. There's a lot of cool information in there, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that I didn't. I mean, I don't know. It was 15 years ago, I think, when I read it, but it really was something that at least started me to think a little differently. And I would encourage anybody, if you want to be open-minded, regardless of your beliefs, then that would be a great start.
That's it. That's where I want to be. I want to be open-minded.
You are. You're great.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and
Thank you.
we'll see you next time.